Bob?
Yeah.
Are you afraid of death?
Yeah.
Me too. And there's no way out of it. You're going to die. I'm going to die. It's going to happen. And what difference does it make if it's tomorrow or in 80 years? Much sooner in your case. Do you know how fast time goes? I was 6, like yesterday.
Me too.
I'm going to die. You are going to die. What else is there to be afraid of?
Hello, Ray.
Hey, I love the opening, but how come you get to be Bill Murray?
Well, he is Bob in the movie, so
Well, that's true. Yeah, right.
so I went for that one.
That was great.
You brought in the darker topic. I felt we all played our roles appropriately there. Thank you all for joining us. I'm Bob Lingle of Off the Beaten Path Bookstore in Lakewood, New York, and we're here with Ray Robertson. Ray is the author of 8 novels, 4 collections of nonfiction, and is it just the one book of poetry? Not just one, but
Isn't that enough? Is it one book of haiku enough for anyone?
Yes. You were born and raised in Chatham, Ontario, and you currently live in Toronto. Well, thank you so much for joining us. My screen shut off, and it was jarring that it was suddenly dark over there. I wanted to match the tone of the video that we just watched. So we all, if you're not aware, we're going to talk about death. And I wanted to read to you and to everyone watching a excerpt from your book, How to Die, a book about being alive. There it is. Obviously, you haven't got a chance. The planet is overpopulated and overheating. Good jobs are disappearing. Murderous imperialism remains unabated. The strong continue to prey upon the weak. Bad art and illogicality are routinely praised and prosper. And oh yeah, you're going to die. Probably not today, likely not tomorrow, but almost certainly sooner than you think. So here we go.
Wow, what a downer.
That is a downer. I was doing a pitch session earlier today with like 50 different publicists trying to get more author events. Super nervous energy, a lot of adrenaline. And I said, later today, I'm going to be talking about death. So right now I'm trying to offset it by being very hyper.
Right. Well, life is the flip side of death. I mean, that's what the woman who did the cover, Ingrid, I love the cover because it's How to Die. And then at the bottom, it says a book about being alive. And she has it in green. And it just feels like, it's a different side of the same coin, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about death, you inevitably talk about life and vice versa. And I think that's one of the things that's missed out on when we don't talk about death, that there's so much that's relevant to here and now and the way we live, so.
And there was a few things that I wanted to make sure that I touched that were just very oddly similar in our first and second experiences of death. I'll let you talk about yours. I'm just going to talk about mine because we're getting personal. So my first experience with death that I recall was a person that I didn't know at all. It was the father of the dance instructor for my brother and sister. I want to say I was like 4 or 5. The only memory that I have is being in like the lobby of the funeral home.
Right.
Like I was just brought in and said, "This is what's going on." I would have no memory of it.
Right.
I'm sitting there. I want to say I'm by myself. I'm probably not with a family member. And I'm like, there's a dead body in the other.
Right. That's all
I know.
Yeah. And that was your first dead body that you saw?
That was the first dead body that I was close to.
Yeah, right.
The second experience and the first dead body that I saw was a childhood friend. It was my brother's friends, and we all like played street hockey together and just played. It was very much Sandlot, Stand By Me growing up experience. Right. And he tragically got hit by a car in a car accident.
God, playing road hockey?
What was that?
Playing road hockey?
No, no, it was
Oh, good.
it was probably worse than that. It was like the week leading up to Christmas. He was crossing the street behind a bus to get to the mall, and yeah.
Wow.
So that was the first dead body that I saw, and that was also, it was in middle school at
And
that.
some of your own age too, right?
Yeah, just a few years older, but yeah, close.
Yeah.
And then like after that, it was like floodgates. It was grandparents, friend of my dad's best friend, more grandparents. So yeah, you had similar first experiences.
Yeah, I think a lot of us do, and that's one of the things that I wanted to do with the book. It was not that anyone, not that I'm famous in Canada, but I got a little more reputation here than I do in the States. And one of the things that I like to think is important in my work is humor. And it was a real challenge to write a short, pithy book about death and not be, solemn and pretentious and things. And I think one of the ways that you do that, and one of the reasons that I like to write nonfiction, is to use the anecdotal. And you use that as part of, you're talking about Jean-Paul Sartre, but you're also talking about, oh, well, when I was playing road hockey when I was 10 kind of deal. And I think that's one of the things that really comes from being a fiction writer, is that, you convince Flannery O'Connor is famous for saying the reader won't believe anything you tell them. You have to show them, you have to make them feel it. And that's hard to do with ideas. I trained in philosophy before I decided to wisely get out. And the empirical approach of literature to me is a much more interesting way of talking about death than the sort of baldly analytical sort of. And I had some fun with that, taking the piss out of Heidegger and some these torturous language. But yeah, these little experiences we have, these little epiphanies we have when we're 7, those really when philosophy begins. Yeah.
There was one other just weird connection between your writing and myself that was actually in the book of haiku.
Right.
Watching a man mow his lawn, I imagine him falling, clutching his exploded heart. He sure loved to cut the grass, people would say. My dad died on a lawnmower.
Oh, God, I'm sorry. I can't believe you're having
okay. I was just like, between those two things and then that, I'm like, what why did your books come into my life?
Yeah, well, that's great. Isn't that one of the, we were talking before the show began about, what do you want to call it, sort of the literary world we have, which is this very ghettoized world that, it got to the point where a few years ago, when I was a younger writer, like you want a nice review in the Globe and Mail or the Star or something. There came a point where my publicist said, you don't want to be in the book section. What you want is something in the lifestyle. It's like, this is the guy. So actually to have someone, and I've done a few things. I was lucky that How to Die came out before, the quarantine and everything. So I was actually able to promote it for a couple of months. But even when I did that, and you're always happy as a literary writer to get airtime, but this is probably the first time I've actually talked to someone who's read the book. So this is really exciting for me too. And I think that's one of the things about our community is that people feel like, okay, well, most people don't really care about these things, belles lettres, poetry, fiction, whatever, literature. But the ones that do, there is kind of a cool feeling of thinking that, well, we do care about this. We are going to support good bookstores. We are going to support independent press. We're going to do it. And it's a feeling, I'm not really much of a team player. That's why I kind of work, novelists don't play well with others kind of deal. But I do kind of get a buzz off this idea that in a kind of declining readership and bookstores and stuff, there is this kind of like, we're going to circle the wagons here and stand for something, which is words matter. The way words are put together matter. And that's just really encouraging. So I was really thrilled when I got your email saying that. And it's really funny too, because I obviously am not a full-time haiku writer. So this book came out a couple of 6 months or so after How to Die, and I had absolutely no possibility of promoting it. I did a couple Zoom events, but it's not like this. It's you have 8 people reading, and you read 4 poems for 6 people, other writers and stuff, and it's been very disappointing that way. So when I got your email, you had read How to Die, and I thought, oh wow, someone actually read the haiku book besides the 4 people and 4 twisted people who got it the day it came out. So I'm really excited to talk about that too, because it's pretty much, it was a hard time to publish a book, as to run a bookstore post-quarantine.
Yes.
So I was lucky to sneak a few How to Die events in. So this is the unofficial book launch, really, of Last Call Haiku.
Happy to be here for it. There was I wish I wrote it down because I don't want to page through the book, but the haiku about Young Street.
Right.
I reached out to you on Instagram months ago, right after I read that.
Right.
That was another weird dad connection of
You told me.
Being from Buffalo. We're kind of like honorary Canadians.
Right.
We went up to a Blue Jays Yankees game,
Right.
and my dad wasn't with us. But after the fact, we got together with him and said, "Oh, we were driving down the street, and it was just there was prostitutes all over the place. It just looked like a pretty bad place." And without missing a beat, Young Street? Yeah, Young Street. How did that answer? So
yeah. Well, I don't know if you read the introduction to the book. We can talk about that too. Like, it certainly wasn't something I expected to do. It wasn't like, I'm going to publish 12 books and then I'm going to enter the haiku years.
Yeah.
It's just sort of, but it's been a delightful sort of it's kind of like having a late in life love affair. I never really. It's kind of like a little private. I'm always working on a book. I got a book coming out next year. But I always have this thing that I can cheat with. It's like I don't have to work on the novel today. I can go fool around with the haiku. So that's really rewarding that some of them resonated.
I was just about to make mention, and then my mom chimed in with a question. If you have anyone watching at home or wherever you are, I don't know why I said at home. If you have any questions or comments, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, you can use the comment section, and that'll pop over to us, and we'll be able to answer those. It was a very short. Well, haikus are all short. To answer my mom's question, haiku about my father without crying, short.
Yeah,
it was jarring more than anything. But I wanted to talk about your thesis for How to Die, or the unofficial thesis for How to Die, and kind of how I haven't read all of your books. I'm in the middle of 1979. I was there the night he died because I want to read through that next. Death seems to be a recurring theme throughout your work. So your unofficial thesis is, if we gain a better understanding of what death is, we'll also know more about what life consists. Walk me through the process of where you were, how you were approaching this book, and what you wanted to do with it.
Well, as you say, I mostly write novels, and what I've been doing the last, I guess, 10 years or so is writing a novel and then taking a little time off and then wanting to write again, but not being capable of creating a whole new universe. So I've been using opportunity to do a lot of things in nonfiction. So books about music. I wrote a book of essays about music, some outsider musicians, lives of poets, and the precursor to this book was actually, in a way, was a book called Why Not? 15 Reasons to Live, which came out in 2011. And basically, that book was about, I had gotten sick. I had gotten depressed. It was mostly physiological. My life actually couldn't have been better at the time in a lot of ways. But I had gotten sick through personal lifestyle choices, diet, things. And when I got better, I thought, it's not going to be too long before I start taking life for granted again, as I know human beings do. So all the things that I couldn't do when I was sick, I sort of wrote an essay about. So there's an essay about work and love and, all sorts of the things that make life worth living. And the last chapter of the 15 was death, because just kind of similar argument to How to Die, in the sense that unless we're aware of the contingency of life, the ethereality of it, that it loses some of its essence. And so I just kind of thought that this book, How to Die, a book about being alive, was sort of a continuation of the last chapter of Why Not. And I guess, and it's not like I had a thesis. I really didn't. I mean, I write books to find out what I think about the subject. Or a novel. The book I'm writing right now, not the novel that's coming out next year, but a novel after that. Something happened the last couple of days that I didn't plan to have happen, which is always a great sign. Again, going back to Flannery O'Connor, she wrote such a wonderful book on writing called Mystery and Manners, and one of her essays in there, she says, if the writer isn't surprised, that's not a good sign, kind of deal. So it's the same thing for me with nonfiction. I mean, I knew I wanted to talk about the fragility of life and how that gives us perspective. But you can put that in a Horace poem. You don't need a whole book about it. But I also kind of feel like one of my jobs is to be the cranky person who says, this is disingenuous. This is bullshit. This is kind of deal, which isn't propagating a particular thesis. It's just sort of, the traditional job of philosophy, sort of illuminating the problem. Maybe that will help. I mean, probably that's all there is. I mean, Emerson says somewhere, the only thing of value is an active mind. It's not so much reaching a conclusion, going, got it all figured out now. Life, I know what it means, Yeah. But I think understanding the question is probably what makes life worth living. I think that's one. I mean, why not make death one of those things that you think, but not the only thing. I mean, we talk about love, every pop song, every movie, there, you got all that. So it's not just death, but it's one of those things that I think that, frankly, I had more to say. And certainly there was more that's been said in Western literature mostly Western literature for the last 2,500 years that I kind of wanted to propagate. I mean, Shakespeare said some great stuff about death that, that hasn't gone bad yet. It's still pretty amazing. I want to share that because I feel like I benefit from a lifetime of reading, and it feels like a way of giving back in a way, So the anecdotal, talking about people who have sustained me different thoughts. I use Elizabeth Kubler-Ross in the book. And it just seemed like a wonderful place to be for 6 or 7 or 8 months, thinking about death and its relation to life.
Yeah.
But then I was ready to write a novel again. So
just before reading How to Die, I was weird going down this weird path of my brother recommended this Netflix documentary about like the afterlife. We're both pretty much like non-believers in most things, and he said this is pretty convincing and compelling, so I watched it. And then I'd been meaning to read Christopher Ryan's Civilized to Death, so I'm like, well, it's not exactly about death, but I'm like, I want to read it. It has death in the title.
Right.
And then reading How to Die, you and Christopher both come to similar opinions. His was a little bit more stronger in the sense of people never think about death.
Right.
Like people never think about their own death. And I'm like, I think about my own death like every day.
Talk to someone who's 80.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that I worked on. My editor was actually quite helpful. He kind of helped me turn it from a really good long essay into a good short book. And one of the things he said was, you've got this, you're going to think about it. He said, people do. And in fact, this book probably isn't ideal. Like you talk to people who are 80 and they say, when you wake up in the morning, it's like, well, one more day, or someone's a little lightheaded when they stand up. They think, is this it? Kind of deal, right? But that's one of the things that's unique about this book, I think, is what I'm saying is the time to think about death is when you're young and healthy. Not young, but when you're relative. I'm not young before, but because it's really about what death is useless unless it can help us with life. The great songwriter Townes Van Zandt said that, living is dancing, dying is doing nothing at all. And it is. So how can we get something from it? I mean, it's a price we're all going to pay. So why not get get as much out of it as we can? And that means thinking about it and what it means for how I'm going to live my life and how I'm going to interact with other people and what I'm going to value.
Mm-hmm.
I
have to say that, like, of all the things that I've read, once I reached the end of your book, I felt myself more at acceptance with the idea of it than I have with other things. So thank you. I don't know how long that will last, but currently I'm in a good headspace.
Just got to read it again. That's all.
Yeah. A lot of highlighting. I've got a lot of notes. So
well, the reason that's really rewarding, I mean, that's really nice to hear. I mean, but what's really nice about it is that I don't want to give the book away, but as you know, the book doesn't end on a sunny note like, we are all people and we must all, it really ends on a real hard note of reality when I thought I was going to be killed at one point. And I knew that one day, I obviously wasn't, and it was fine. But as I was walking away, I remember thinking, not this time.
Yeah.
As opposed to, and this is the thing, everyone, I don't have a lot of happy endings, but I think that they're honest. And I think that's the only way that you can have happiness, to sort of base it on, the truth, or as opposed to, I too, when I was writing this book, I read a lot of things about death, mostly ancient authors, but a lot of contemporary. It just seemed, as I tried to point in the book, it just seemed too tidy. The way, well, this logically, there's nothing to worry about. So go on with your life. Yeah. But I still feel that way,
Well, was it Mark Twain that you had quoted about, like, I've been dead for, or Yeah.
which is a paraphrase of a pre-Socratic. I think it was. I can't remember at the moment. But yeah, I was dead long before I was born. I'll be dead long afterward. I'm not going to worry about it now, kind of deal. Which is all true. And that's the neat thing about when I left philosophy. I did a degree at U of T in philosophy and religious studies. And when I sort of at the end, I kind of changed direction and decided to write novels. I really felt that philosophy didn't permit me to enter into all these contradictions and all these, but on the one hand, on this kind of deal, and that to me seemed closer to reality and what real people real think, as opposed to, you know, a logically airtight argument about how you should not be worried about death. You know, it's not true. At 4 a.m., you know, your 4 a.m. thoughts, and that's going to happen. And I thought that literature was closer to that. Again, entering into that, and that's one of the things that's great about good art, whether it be books or film or music or whatever, is that you enter into that opaque, which is where all the interesting stuff is, which is why politics and such, although they're valuable, have no interest for me, because you have two different points of view and you argue. And art is the opposite of that. Yeats says somewhere that out of arguments with others, we make rhetoric, out of arguments with ourselves, we make art. And I think a book like this, it may seem like I have some, you know, cut and dried ideas, but really it's an exploration. And that's why one of the epigraphs is from Montaigne, who had inscribed over the door to his studio in Bordeaux, "What do I know?" You know, every time he sat down to invent what we call the essays, he had to pass by something that said, what do you know? You know, I'm going to explore this. So that's what an essay is. It's an attempt. So I find that short of a novel, the essay form is the best place to sort of go searching for what it means to be alive, you know.
I don't want to spoil the ending, although it's not a novel, so
no, it's not
anything. But there was another weird parallel between your writing and my life. I had read that just after finishing up a week or the few days of the virtual Winter Institute.
Well.
Which a lot less guns
right.
at the virtual Winter Institute.
This is great. This is great. I can't read some fiction because I'm sure the minutia can. I mean, and that's one of the nice things. You know, there's a lot of downsides to it. You know, this book did. Some people usually ask me who haven't read the book. They say, "What did you learn about death in your book?" Kind of deal. And there actually is. There are a couple things that came through me. And one of them just is how messy life is and how necessary it is for us to examine the parts in hopefully a loving, entertaining, enlivening way. I don't want to read a book, let alone write a book that doesn't make me constantly feel more alive, and not happy, but more alive. And I think that's one of the things that's come through, that whether it's nonfiction or fiction or whatever, it's this curiosity about our existence, which, you know, I didn't go on and study philosophy at the graduate level or whatever, but that's when I started off in Chatham, you know, going off to the big city. That's what I thought philosophy was that, what does it mean to be alive? And I'm just so thankful that for one reason or another, I end up drifting into the highly lucrative world of writing literary fiction.
One thing that aspect of the book that I really enjoyed was the kind of like the happiness paradox, where like North Americans are, especially the United States of America, has the pursuit of happiness.
Right.
But then you have the ironic part of it of the people who don't have the ability or the means to pursue happiness look at our like whininess of,
right.
Oh, why can't I have this? Or why, like, the world owes me something.
Right.
They just have reached more of a level of contentment.
Yeah, I don't even know if it's contentment. It's just resignation. You know, we spent a few of my books, for whatever reason, have been published in Serbia. There seems to be a small readership there, so we've gone over a couple times. And it's not like, you know, you reach a state of bliss because of this. It's more just sort of like, you know, this. It's not, resignation sounds sad, but it's actually quite beautiful. It's more like a stoicism. Like, I'm not waiting for happiness to arrive from Amazon. You know, it's like, or it has to be. And that's one of the things that's interesting. Our argument about death fits in with this North American ethos that. You know, I don't really want to talk about, you know, COVID-19 or the pandemic or anything, but what's interesting is this idea that, you know, this shouldn't be happening to us. You know, bad things should not be happening. But we'll get a pill. We're going to get a shot, and it's going to be fine.
Yeah.
You know, it's really not. I mean, I don't know what's going on in the States, but in Canada, a whole 2 nursing homes in British Columbia, after the senior citizens have been inoculated, they got sick again. Not as bad,
Yeah.
you know, but it's almost like, well, when is it? I had to just keep my head from exploding around New Year's Eve, when it was like, thankfully 2020 is over. 2021 is going to be, no, it's just 3 days later of the same shit that's been going on. I shouldn't swear, but and that's part of the North American thing. Like, you know, we've been good soldiers for this. I mean, there are people. I mean, I remember people talking about this at the beginning. Like, you know what? A friend that we know, her mother, and it was like, yeah, my husband and I were separated for 3 years during World War II. You know, this is horrible, but you know, this is not something that inadvertently happened. This is just life, and I think that comes to the conversation about death. Is somehow, if we sanitize it, if we don't think about it, it's just an unpleasant, you know, inconvenient truth, so to speak, you know. And it seems to me it's one of the things art can do via being entertaining and lively and affirmative is to sort of shake us once in a while, you know, because we don't want to be. I don't want to be. You talked about that sense of entitlement. Well, it's not. Like, you go through history, every empire is like that. It's not like, oh, Americans are bad or North Americans or Canadian. You know, it happens, you know. I mean, it happened to the Britons. It happened. Read the Romans, you know. You shouldn't be able to pick up you shouldn't be able to tweet unless you've read Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire by Gibbons, right? To really know this is not new, right? This has happened before, and it'll happen to China in 150 years, and this is the cycle that we go through, but that's okay, because that's who we are. It's reality. But I don't like the idea that somehow we hide from it and sort of say, oh, no, forever. No, there's just no forever. Where in history has there been forever? Where has it ever been this steady with this idea of progress that's really bizarre? It's never existed in history. But somehow, because we have these huge technological gains, that somehow everything commensurate with that. Well, happiness will go up and fulfillment will go up. No, it just means that, you know, you have to answer 15 texts before you go to bed. That's what it means, really.
That takes me back to, not to boost another author, but Christopher Ryan's Civilized to Death really hits home on a lot of those things. Of he's really pro hunter-gatherer, because everything after that just kind of created more problems, where there was obviously issues when there was hunter-gatherers, but there was a bit more balance in
Yeah, exactly. And I haven't read the book, and I know that you've played it up on your Instagram stuff, so I should read it. But that again, I'm not propagating a theory. I'm not on here pumping. I just more, you know, Henry James said the only thing that a writer does that's important is to be one of those upon whom nothing is lost. Now, obviously, a lot's lost, especially on me. But being aware of what's going around you, not being aware, not following the narrative in the media or friends or whatever. That's one of the positives about getting old, is that, you know, you start to fall apart, but you also go, I've seen this before. You know, this is not quite the headlines that everyone, you know, I've been through this before. I've been through this. Not that it's old hat, but there's a certain sickliness to this that is kind of interesting. You know, this is human nature. I mean, politics are about how we're different, and that's we need to do that. Art is how we're the same, and I think there's a real hesitancy, especially in our culture, that to even, you know, well, I'm not the same as you. This whole idea of inclusion that began like with civil rights or whatever, you know, I'm 54 years old. The idea was that you know, sort of people moving together. And I think it's one of the things that art can do, is show us that in spite of growing up in great poverty and great discrimination, you still worry about dying. You know, being woke doesn't save you from dying. You know, it doesn't. You're still gonna. Yeah, and the people that you care about are going to be gone, you know. And you get older, and I have friends. My friend, who's the publisher of the haiku book, we had a little meeting to go over the introduction at a cafe. You know, he was Barry Callahan, a wonderful writer and editor. His father was a great Canadian writer, Maury Callahan. Anyway, so he said, you know, meet me. You can't just meet him to talk about the book. You have to meet him at like on a patio outside with like a bucket of, you know, whiskey there, kind of, you know. And we were sitting there, and he's 82, I think. He's 82. And I was talking to him. He said, you don't understand. This is not my Toronto. He was born there. He's 83. says, all the people I know are dead, all the restaurants, all the bars, all of the everything is gone. It's a whole different world. And yet I'm alive in it. And that's, but it's sad, but also it's fascinating because it's going to happen to all of us. We're all going to be strangers in our own towns, you know, at a certain age, you know, people like your age take over. You start making the rules. And it's fascinating, but it's also, but it's part of our, it's part of who we are. It's part of the process. It's if you look at it the right way, it's quite fascinating. And you know,
well, on that, there's a question from the audience, but before I get into that, there's one thing from 1979.
right.
I always have like 2 or 3 different writing projects, never finish any of them, but the one that I'm working on has a line that's very similar to.
Which one is it? Which one is it?
It's the classmate. They're like talking about the solar system, and
Right.
the classmate references like what happens to the sun like in 6 years, and I have like this near future dystopian novel where the main character has depression, and he just kind of like has come to this acceptance that like nothing really matters because in 6 billion years the sun will expand and just take away everything on the earth. I'm like, hey, all right.
Well, you know,
that's why we need to have a conversation. So do you ever that? You
I
know,
got a new haiku. I wrote a haiku about 6 months ago about that. So I'll send that to you.
Right.
It's a haiku about the Earth exploding, or the planet exploding.
Looking forward to it. On that similar note, Janine Roth asks if we're accepting questions. Yes.
Yes.
The young, dynamic, intelligent guy focused so much on death that he writes a book about it.
I don't know anyone who's young or intelligent who wrote about it, but I wrote about it. and as I say, it kind of was it wasn't a sequel. I hate that idea, but I don't think I had enough to. I don't think I had said everything I had to say about death in the last chapter of Why Not? Good Reasons to Live, because you said something earlier about you had read. Well, you read a couple books, and there's a lot about death, and I don't think of it that way. I really don't. I don't think of myself as morbid. I think of myself as pretty silly, and you know. But for those 3 hours a day that you work, 5 days a week or whatever it is, that's one of the things that I've been lucky about. I haven't had to write a specific thing. I've just written whatever I've wanted and then found someone foolish enough to publish it. And then maybe a few people would actually be, you know, weird enough to read it. And this book to me seemed like the right time. I had talked about doing this before, a couple books before. Mm-hmm. And I think turning 50 had something to do with it. It wasn't unusual. When you're young, you say, oh my God, did you hear about so-and-so? Now it's like, did you hear about so-and-so? It's not just death. It's people we know our age who died. We had a friend, I wrote about her in the book, who died, and she died of cancer in her early 40s. And there are two ways you can think about it. You know, you can think about, well, I already have all that stuff figured out. I know I'm going to heaven or this or that, or I'm not going to think about it, the Mark Twain idea. Or you're going to think, boy, if I avoid this, I'm really not being an honest witness to my time in my life, which is what I've tried to do. Because basically I'm lazy. And if I'm not interested, I can't do it, you know. I mean, I've been meaning to clean up the poop in the backyard for weeks. And today it was just too nice out. I had to do it. I don't have to tell myself to go and write every day. It gives me the stability. So even if I'm writing about death, when I walk away after 3 hours, I feel like, well, the rest of the day is gravy because I made a little bit of sense to myself, or I put a nice paragraph together, or I had a great line or a funny something or whatever. You're kind of impervious the rest of the time, which is why writers, including myself, you tend to get into trouble between books. That's when you're going, kind of like, and so that's why I like to jump back into a different genre right away, keep myself locked away, which doesn't answer the question, but.
Janine retracted her youth part of her.
I don't know if I felt worse before or now.
Well, you look young. So she had a follow-up of, so when you write about death, you seem to really be writing about life, which you kind of addressed earlier, that it's two sides of the same.
Yeah, I mean, it's unavoidable. I mean, it's like, you know, people, you don't, it's hard to really hate someone unless you love them. I mean, really hate someone, right? You have to sort of have that love. And I think it's the same thing with death. you have to really think about, I mean, if one is to think, I mean, one of the examples I use in the book is really simple. We probably all had some, or maybe we personally experienced it. Someone who has a near-death encounter, someone who says, you've got cancer, and they go through and they beat it. Those people are changed for a little while.
Yeah.
Because that's what human nature is. And we've all experienced that is, you know, when you have the flu, you're like, if only I could have solid food, I would never ask for anything ever again. And then within 2 days, you're complaining there's enough salt on it, kind of deal. And that's one of the things that art can do. We can freeze time and say, well, what is it? That's when I wrote 15 Reasons to Live. It was like all these things, like my life externally was fantastic, you know, like it was just crazy, the number of things happening, but I was miserable. And all the things that give my life sustenance, because I'm not really, I don't have kids and I don't have a lot of outside things that I'm very routinized. And none of those things were attractive. All of them were some of them were impossible for me to do. And I knew that unless I wrote about it, I would just sort of say, yeah, that was a bad patch, but I got through it, which is true.
Yeah.
But I think that's the writer's job. I mean, not everybody's job is to reflect upon death or even upon beauty. It's even more absurd that way. You know, a normal person would see a beautiful sunset and say, let's just sit here and appreciate it. I asked my wife, what color is that? What would you call that? I don't know, because she's a painter. Because you know you want it that way. So it's not any more absurd to think about death for a prolonged period as it is to think about happiness. I mean, ideally, if you just be happy, right?
Ideally.
Ideally.
So I got nervous that I was going to become very uncomfortable about my book collection when you were talking about your acquisition for the sake of acquisition.
Well, you're excused because you're a book dealer. All book dealers, yeah. Did you want to say more, or do you want me to comment on that?
If you wanted to,
if you want to set it up, you could.
I know where you kind of went with it.
Get some water. Keep talking.
For sure. So Ray went on a journey to get water. He also went on a journey of when he was younger, he would go to bookstores, record stores, and try to find the thing or stumble upon the thing that may change your life, whether intentionally or unintentionally. You kind of it seemed like you lost that a bit, but then you found a new thing.
Yeah. And on a smaller scale, just in terms of a certain age. I mean, I'm looking into our library. There's no more room. I got Bexel back, etc. But it wasn't even so much an economic concern or a space concern as it was that I felt that acquisition wasn't as interesting anymore as going deeper into what I already had. Like I tend not to read much when I'm writing. I especially don't read fiction when I'm writing. I'm working on this novel right now. It's going out next year. And I looked up my shelf and I saw there was a biography of H.L. Mencken that I had bought probably like 10 years ago at some sale for $3. And I went up and okay. And I read that. There's no reason for me to be going and, you know, getting some other. I looked up and I had his letters. I had his journal. I hadn't read any of them, but I knew that I wanted to one day, right? And that was the same thing with music as well. When I started listening to stuff that was more improvisational, like The Dead and some early Allman Brothers and things, and I'd never been interested in jazz, and it sort of took me in that direction. Now, what that ended up happening was now I've got a little jazz library, now I've got a jazz section kind of deal, but I think it's just sort of managing something that's never going to go away, but it felt more appropriate to who I was at this point to sort of say, I'll tell you what happened. Maybe I even put it in the book, I forget, but I used to be really buy a lot of vinyl. It was actually 2 bookseller friends gave me a record player, bookstore, record store, and they gave me a record player saying, you know, you get wingy between books, so go off and have a hobby now. Well, it was great, you know, especially if we travel. I don't like to travel much, so I travel doing something with a book. My wife would come. She'd go to the art gallery, and I'd go to some secondhand record store and spend the whole afternoon on my knees going through bins, and it was great. But there came a point where I came home and, you know, I bought this record, whatever, and I went to file it away, and I already had the record, which I had never listened to. So I had 2 copies of the same record I had never listened to. You know, it was like the banjo player in this person's band who put out 2 small labels, solo albums, and this and this. And I'm never going to listen to this. You know, I may one day listen to one of them, but I certainly need to. And that was kind of, and it, you know, it's not like in bad art. It's not like there was this big epiphany. I was like, oh my God, I knew then that life was not about, you know, but there was this slow sense of it just felt right to focus on what was here that I had. Mm-hmm. And to go deeper into it, you know, I've never really, I'd always been kind of scared of jazz. Jazz always seemed to be sort of what inside your head was like. Why do I want that exploratory, chaotic thing? I like a song kind of deal. And it was exciting. And it's exciting to think that you can still feel that way as you get older. Because usually when you're young, every Saturday night's like that. Like tonight's the night that I could meet someone, or I could find out, and it's legitimate. It's true. You're supposed to have that chemistry when you're young. But there comes a point where you can fall into, I talk about Kerouac, where he was just constantly trying to recapture that youthful thing, which has its place a few nights a year maybe, but as a meaning-sustaining whatever, philosophy or whatever, it's sort of age appropriate. And Kerouac never made that transition into something other. And I think that's one of the saddest things about. I'm going about Kerouac. I wrote a book about Kerouac too, so I have to read that one day. Tell me what you think. So
I will add it to my list. Got a couple questions. The one's for me, so I'll answer that one. She was curious how Off the Beaten Path learned about you and the book. I don't remember. I mean, my job is to discover, like, we don't do a ton of like bestseller, James Patterson, David Baldacci, like the things that you find in Walmart for 40% off. We have loyal customers that will ask for that because they want it. We'll order it in. But the favorite part of my job is to find authors and writers and books and new ideas. I think I had read a book that was published by Biblioasis. I can't remember what it was. I'll have to look it up. Really enjoyed it. So then I started searching what else do they have out there, and that was when I saw How to Die, and I'm like, well, that's interesting. So I picked it up like a year ago, and I'd been like, once the COVID happened, I'm like, I don't really want to read a book about it.
Perfect time.
It sat on my shelf for months, and then I finally sat down. I'm like, you know what? Like, I had read Civilized to Death. Why not go into another book that has death in the title? And I just loved it. There's off topic, but kind of on topic. Gecko Press is a new publisher that I'm also obsessed with. It's out of New Zealand, and they do like young adult and children's books that North American audiences wouldn't normally have a chance to read. And there's a lot of death in those books and just weird, like uncomfortable stories, and it's great. I hope I don't traumatize any children.
Well, I just want to add, I mean, this isn't, you can Google me and see I normally don't have this rapport with people talking to me, but we were talking beforehand about how important bookstores like yours are. It's more important than you can imagine. There's a faint pulse out there for literature, for books. Serious books may not be everybody's cup of tea. I know I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but the fact that you're in a different country, and I think they're the best press in Canada, but they're certainly not, bestseller kind of stuff. I don't say it's hope, but it makes you feel more like you're not writing in a void as much. That there might be, because that's really what you want. I remember being a kid and reading some interview with Ford Coppola, I think, and they were like, "Well, he was the height of his success. Like, what is your idea of success?" He said, "My ideal success is that some fat girl in Iowa will see one of my films and decide to change the world." That lonely kid who's ostracized. And oddly enough, I read an interview with Updike when I was young too, and he said, some young girl will go up on a bookshelf in our library, and it'll be a dusty book that no one's checked out in 7 years, and then she'll see the world differently, and therefore, and not change the world, but just change yourself. And to think that one person that sounds, you don't want to tell publishers that because they need to sell more than one, but I'll take somebody who actually says, "Oh, I like this book. I think I'll read something else by it." I mean, to me, that's my idea of success. As long as I can keep a roof over my head and keep my dog in kibble, that's kind of what our job is, really. One person, that's great. And so I thank you for having a bookstore that does that. Because I thank you people who support them. You can just buy it online.
There was another. Don't talk about online. These customers aren't aware of the internet. So there's another question. It was a topic that I was debating if I wanted to get into it, but the customer brought it up. So we're gonna.
Always right.
So does religion play any role in your life today? She really related to your 5th grade religion experience.
Well, I guess I'm not in a Judeo-Christian sort of great religion way, not at all. But I think it's really interesting, the sense that I think if someone would talk my work as sort of a hard agnosticism, but I mean, I'm constantly quoting Martin Buber and Gabriel Marcel and Paul Tillich, because when I went from my small little town to the University of Toronto and studied philosophy, I kind of fell out of love with philosophy because the program was very analytical and language based, and I drifted toward the religious studies department so much that I ended up doing a double major, because the kind of things that were being talked about in those classes were much more interesting to me, seemed to be much more pertinent to what life is. So I guess I've always had an interested in the metaphysical, what we do when we're here. If we're lucky enough to live in a place where we got enough to eat, we're not cold, so what do we do with ourselves? And that seems to be much more interesting. So I don't think, but one thing that has happened recently is, well, not religious, but I have been smoking a lot more dope recently in the last couple of years, because it's much more healthy than drinking wine. And one thing that I think is interesting is that, with the right sort of chemical enhancement, looking up at a star full of skies, if that isn't religious, then I guess not. But if it is, it's general, and this is why you rely upon religious thinkers, is that you use terms like mystery. You use terms that are outside the realm traditionally of religion, like a moral code or anything like that. As terms as that stuff goes, I'm with William Blake, where Blake said that if I don't invent my religion, some other person will force theirs upon me. So I've always sort of taken little bits and pieces, and Blake's always been a model that way. I wrote a novel called David, where the character says that he constructs that way. But in terms of that religious sense, it doesn't have to be pot or whatever, but my wife is a painter, but she's from northern Ontario. Like, I'm from southern Ontario, so she's about like 18 hours north of where I was born. And so she has that experience with nature. You can put her in front of a lake, a cold, freezing lake, and she has that same sense of like awe, the sublime, whatever. And if we're lucky enough, again, to have enough a roof over our head, etc., I think that's one of the reasons that we're here to be. And it's such a refreshing thing, because we feel so often, this is why I keep coming back to religion, is that we can become so technique oriented, so technology oriented. We got our little things, and we forget that we're on this floating rock in this eternity of darkness or whatever. I mean, if that doesn't give you goosebumps, I mean, that's some fascinating stuff, right? And I think that's why you constantly need to come back to not just, to religion, but also highly charged language, what we would call poetry, but not necessarily poetry, but highly charged language, because we need to be woken up. I mean, you really come back to that Buddhist idea. I mean, this is a dream. This isn't real. I mean, even if you have kids and they go on, they're going to be, this is all a dream that we're dreaming, kind of, in a way. I mean, it's very real. I'm not materialist, but there's also bumping up against this idea. And at my age, I kind of feel very lucky that I've sort of had more of an acquaintance with this mystery, because there were certainly a lot of things that I wasn't seeing by not looking at those stars. And I don't think I'll ever be sort of a calm, content person, but I do feel occasionally like the sky tells you, just shut up and listen for a change. And I think we need that. I think I need that, and I don't even have a cell phone, so I suppose that if I need it, everybody needs it, right?
There, you had a reference to this Buddhist idea of imagining your body decaying, and it was a very, very jarring depiction, but necessary. There's a book that I actually am a seminary dropout.
Oh, interesting.
Got never really fully into Buddhism, but in enough that it corrupted me. So when I was in seminary, I was like, yeah, this doesn't all jive together.
Right.
And going through that, there was a one passage from Pieces Every Step, and I never feel comfortable saying the author's name, the Thich Nhat Hanh.
I don't know. So.
Right.
I wouldn't know if you're wrong, so it's okay.
So he kind of like, it's the peaceful aspect of it, of absorbing what's going on around you, and it's the eating a cookie, and you
Yeah.
think about all of the people that were a part of, and all of the aspects of Earth that were a part of the process of the cookie that you are now eating. And it was very different. The cookie aspect was much lighter than imagining your body decomposing, but it all touched on that.
Yeah, I might want to get that title. Yeah, I've been thinking about the book I'm writing right now. I want to give the title because it's not. Anyway, it's his book, and these three guys are sitting out in this shed, this tin shed, and they're talking about how the rain and the snow and the sun has been on. The guys out back who told me when they fixed it up from, they said it's probably like just before World War II. It's been up there. It's ruled now. And I just thinking about the snow and the rain that fell on that in 1946 or 1962, or the headline of the paper was Kennedy assassinated, and that was the same roof. And it's kind of that Buddhist idea in the sense that there's this material thing, but then we're part of this huge that we just think, well, it's this little part of Toronto tucked away in this little neighborhood. No, it's part of this huge thing, which of course we can't think about because our minds would explode, right? We need to sort of focus on not getting hit when we cross the street and remembering to pick up someone after class, kind of deal. But that's the time that we set away for art, whether it be books or movies or music, is to sort of say, and that's why I think good writing is antithetical to our culture in a sense, because I think our culture, the idea is to flatter the reader, flatter the audience, make them feel that they're on the right side of the argument, that we're good people and they're bad people, and one day that will be, or we're all just horribly conflicted and ambivalent and full of all these richness and these contradictions. And I think that's one of the things that good art can do is get in there and yeah, the cookie's a good metaphor. It's all these parts and pieces, and I think that's much more valuable than sort of saying, well, I have an idea. I mean, you studied, seminary, you studied ideas. Ideas are not that interesting. The implications of the ideas, the idea that you're born, you pay taxes, you die, that's an idea. But what about whose life? How did they live? What did it mean? What did they feel when they were here? And that's when you need things that go beyond. I love popular culture, but you need to go beyond it, because the whole goal is to be instantly accessible, instantly digestible, and that's wonderful. But the rumination that perhaps you would have had in a different generation or a different time with a religious construct, for many people is in a book or a piece of music or a movie or a sunset or a lake, or a child being born or whatever, and all that stuff. These are important things, they're why we're here to a great degree. So
there's a couple questions, possibly an easy one, or it could be very difficult. Who is your favorite author?
Well, the writer that made me want to be a writer, there were two really, like grown-up stuff, not like as a kid. There were four. Kerouac, when I started, just for the sound. I knew he wasn't. Even then, I knew there wasn't a novelist so much as, but I never saw anyone use words that way. A lot of it's clumsy. But as a kid, Carson McCullers, A Heart Is the Only Hunter, just that book. I was very young. I was probably in my early 20s, and she published that book when she was 23. And I don't know if you've read it, but it's like a 400-page book from like 6 different points of view. It's a omniscient point of view, and I just felt utterly awed by it. But when I started to lose my faith in philosophy, it was two American writers, the Mississippi writer Barry Hannah, and most importantly, well, he's born in Michigan, but he lives in Montana, Thomas McGuane. And they literally, their books to me said to me that, because I had a crisis of faith leaving philosophy, and it was like, what am I going to do? Am I going to do journalism, or I don't know, I don't want to have a real job, and I thought, with no logic to it, yeah, I want to do what they're doing. I want to do what McGuane's doing. He looks like he's having so much fun. He's telling a story. Who doesn't like a story? He's using language like a poet. He's extremely funny, which to me is a sign of great wisdom, because someone who can be humorous about a subject can see several sides to it. This is why given our times today, someone asked Milan Kundera once how he could tell when the secret police of the Russians had infiltrated the Czech the student groups. It must have been hard. He said, no, it was easy. They were the ones that didn't have a sense of humor. We knew, kind of deal. So McGuane was doing that, and I just thought, I want someone else to. I guess that's how it starts, right? Bellow says that. He says all writers all writers are readers who want. I forget the quote. It's in my book. I don't know. But basically, if you read enough, you want to do what they've done. You want someone else to feel what you felt, and that's why I consider myself lucky, is because I have been able to write what I've wanted, and I'm sure I'm not as good as McGuane or Hannah, but I really felt that what really blew me away was, because I didn't do an English degree on purpose, because I felt I took a couple courses and it was so boring and bloated and staid and sterile. I just couldn't believe how joyous these books were, and I don't mean happy. I just mean like a sentence. A sentence made me feel like I had to walk around the room. You know,
Yeah.
I only felt that before with maybe reading Nietzsche and maybe a couple of poets, but it was like I can't physically sit still. This language is so alive. And there was something pretty, mystical about that, in the sense that it was just this old yellowed page on a 25-year-old paperback that I got for $1 in a bin somewhere. And then you take it home and it's like, I'm changing my life because these little black squiggles on a yellow page. And that's pretty, that's pretty, for someone who's cynical, and, it's still pretty a wonderful feeling to think that things can change that quickly, and not quickly, but that substantially. Just for something that is the way someone constructs a sentence. Yeah. So they're wonderful writers.
Another question. I feel like this person may know you.
Okay.
Did you co-dedicate your book to your thesis director?
Well, that is one of your countrymen, not mine. My friend Miles Wilson, he was my thesis advisor in. It's a long story, but basically, I did my degree in philosophy. My wife was game. She was a painter. She was tired of the Toronto art scene, so I convinced her to move with me to Wichita, Kansas, because it was the only school that gave me money to go to grad school. I was reading a book one day, and it was like, so-and-so did an MFA in creative writing. We don't have those up here. We didn't. And I was like, really? You can do this? You can avoid getting a job and get paid? Oh, that's great. So I literally went to the Robarts Library at UT, the microfiche, and, you right away for the catalog. So we went away to Wichita State. Anyway, not satisfactory for a few reasons. Anyway, so Miles was the head of the program at Southwest Texas State. It was then called. They've since changed the name of the school. Yeah, it was one of those things that happened that if it didn't happen, I wouldn't be talking to you. I mean, I wouldn't be a writer. And not so much for, on page 7, change this thing, but just the example of someone who cared about words. You grow up in a small town, but that doesn't matter either. You say that, but also then you move to the big town and knowing, the sacredness of the sentence, it's all in there. The way we use words, Politics in the English Language by George Orwell is just one of those essays. And unless you read it, I really don't want to talk to you about anything beyond, language is where the answers are. And so to be around people, when we went to grad school in Texas, like Miles, who just, it was part of life. It wasn't some big exalted thing. You didn't have to wear a beret. You didn't have to wear a turtleneck. You could just be someone who cared passionately about words. And so I've always got a soft spot in my heart for Texas.
We're closing up at 8 o'clock. I wanted to, you had a quote in there about the importance of stories. There can be no happiness without real understanding. Stories, in whatever form one finds them, are essential to living a good life. As a person who sells books, I just wanted to express my appreciation for that.
Good. I don't even recognize this. I write too much. I didn't even recognize that sentence. So I'm glad you liked it, because I don't even remember it. So this has been a blast, so I appreciate it.
No, it's free.
Another question? We got time for one more.
This is a question that, what advice would you offer an up-and-coming writer who's trying to write world-changing books?
Well, give up on that. The world doesn't care about books, which makes them all the more special. And we have things like tonight, like for me, to have someone, do this. You write the books that you want to write, because ultimately you're going to be dissatisfied with what happens with them. I mean, I know people who are successful, not like middle-list writer like me, and they're pretty much unhappy people too. It doesn't change you or the world. What does matter, though, is thinking that, you know what, I couldn't do any better. I couldn't say it any better. I gave everything I had. I'm ready to move on to something else. And it's being an honest witness to your own soul, I think. Now, that said, writing is not confession. You know, the highest proof of seriousness is concern with technique. I don't know who said that. I think Frost said that, or Auden, or somebody. You have to care about words. So ask yourself. I love this story that Annie Dillard tells you. She was at a workshop, like a summer writers thing or something. I don't know the one, but I read the book. And she said some writer came up to her, asked her, a younger writer, as writers will do, and say, you know, you've read my stuff. Do you think I have what it takes to, you know? And she said, I don't know. Do you like words? And he was like, are you kidding me? I'm 22. I don't care about words. I care about, you know, you got to care about words, because words are, you know, as a musician uses notes, a painter uses paint. We don't use ideas. We use words. And so if you're one of those people who does like to sort of say, you know, I spent 14 minutes or 15 minutes on this, and that one sentence just flows better now. That's one of the gold stars that you give yourself. So if I was a younger writer, or not a younger writer, but just someone's, you know, getting interested, to me, it's all about satisfying your own criteria. So, you know, did I say what I wanted to say, and did I say it in a way that, you know, you can look at, someone can read it aloud and go, yeah, that's not so bad. You know, it's not too bad.
Good advice. So unless there is any other questions, thank you so much for taking the time out, Ray. I love talking about these things, and I so very rarely meet somebody who also does.
Well, you're lucky. I got a new novel next year, and it's about a bookseller. So we'll have to come back and chat again.
Perfect. I look forward.
It's called Estates Large and Small, and it's about a guy, secondhand bookseller, how he goes and buys people's estates after they died. So there you go again. The death theme continues.
See, but I did see it in there.
So a year from now, it's coming up next month. From a year from now, we'll chat again.
Awesome. Well, if you're in the area, if you're not, stop by. Whenever.
Yeah, well, that would be really cool. That would be really cool, because it's been so long. I think I did my last event last February.
Okay.
And I was supposed to do stuff in the spring and the fall, and none of that stuff. And I don't know if people watch a lot of these, but they're usually not this good. It's usually it's nice that people have tried to make the virtual event a substitute, but there is nothing like. Now this feels more like it, but I would love to be able to come to the bookstore and come with my wife and hang out, and that would be really cool.
This is filled, because I am a failed documentary filmmaker. This has filled the void in my life of being able to interview them and learn new things. So thank you for that. And we've right now we only have one other event on our YouTube page with Eric Edstrom, who wrote Un-American. He was a West Point graduate, Afghanistan veteran who just became very disillusioned with the military-industrial complex. I love difficult conversations. So if you have any other authors
who are difficult people, every author I know is a difficult person.
Either or.
Right, well,
I love this so much. His books are available in our store, on our website at obpbooks.com, to make myself a salesman. But really appreciate it. Hope you guys liked it.
Yeah, a lot of fun, and keep up the good work. And I'm sure we'll talk before then. But yeah, I'd love to chat to you again. It's been great, Bo.
Thank you.